My name is Father John Hollowell again, and I'm the pastor of two parishes a little bit east of here, and also DePaul University and Putnamville Correctional Facility. And excuse me. And so, as a Catholic, you may be familiar. Indiana is split up into 5 dioceses, and so most of southern Indiana, except for the Evansville and the surrounding area, is the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. It falls under that purview. I then am a person who I make a vow to be a priest for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis for my whole life, and so I am doing that at my current assignment. We have, a couple of people in the Archdiocese who are, as with I think a lot of similar organizations on all sides of any issue, we have people who specialize and kind of work with the legislative bodies and governmental processes, and there's actually it's called ICANN for us, Indiana Catholic Action Network, or something along those lines. So I'm not from that branch. I can speak to you though just a little bit about I know enough, I guess, about the Catholic position to kind of, I guess, at least represent it a little bit. I may not have all the answers that are asked of me. I will say, interestingly enough, though, I did just on my own time work on and help serve as the executive producer over the last. Well, we finished it about a year ago, a film called The Third Way. And it was a film that really attempted to explain to both Catholics and non-Catholics what the Church teaches, what the Catholic Church really says about homosexuality and so forth. That issue obviously only getting louder. And we talked a lot. We called it The Third Way because there's so much rhetoric on both sides about that either you are, that everything is okay, or on the other side, God hates everyone except for me, and that the Catholic Church kind of puts forth a third way that, and we interviewed a lot of folks who identify as LGBT and yet are Catholic, and wanted to look at why that is, and it has actually proven to be, I think, something that has received international acclaim from people on both sides and so forth. So in that sense, I guess I do have a little bit of experience that I can lend, but I guess my day job is still a pastor of 2 small parishes in Indiana. Passing on then, I guess, kind of what the Catholic Church where the Catholic Church stands on RFRA, the bishops of Indiana came out in support of the original drafting of RFRA. And there was, although I should say there was a lot of discussion about whether or not that should take place, not just from people who said, RFRA is not nice, or, but also from people who were concerned that RFRA, if we went along, if the Catholic Church endorsed RFRA, that we would be potentially putting our faith, beliefs in more jeopardy. But I guess I think that ultimately the decision was made that, well, we're basically heading towards a situation where when civil liberties collide, it's going to be something that the courts are going to settle anyways, which is basically what the original RFRA kind of put forward. And so the decision was made to support that in a statement that, again, also, although most people don't either read it or want to hear it, the Church spent most of its time in the statement in support of RFRA, affirming the human dignity of all people, regardless of their attractions, their orientation, and so forth. And so, but then, with regards to the fix that was proposed, the Catholic Church came out in Indiana with really basically just questions, and probably, I guess you would say, the statement conveyed a sense of concern because it was back to, well, what is a religious institution and what is not, and so forth. it said in its statement, is a Catholic hospital a religious institution or not? Those kind of things. And I guess those are still being determined. I think ultimately the concern, and I'll be quiet after this, the concern is that has crept up in Catholic circles is what is freedom of worship? We hear with the First Amendment, we hear it being described now more and more as, yes, okay, we believe that the Constitution gives you a right to worship in your church. And that's a fairly, from our perspective, that's a fairly scary description of religious freedom. Because we have a word for people who only practice their faith within the walls of the church, and we call them hypocrites. And so the Catholic Church in its universities, in its Catholic schools, in its Catholic hospitals, in Catholic charities, and all of the work that's going on there, that is being, sometimes in some circles, is being talked about as not being an arm or a falling under the purview of religious freedom. And I think that is very concerning for most Catholics that are out there. And so we are always concerned when we hear the language of religious freedom only being something that's talked about in regards to the right to worship in your church building. I'll try and be brief. I think with human rights ordinances and with anything, the church doesn't kind of come out and, Archbishop Tobin, who is the Archbishop of Indianapolis Archdiocese, doesn't come out and make statements about something like human rights ordinances as a concept, hey, we're for them or we're, against them. I think it's always, for us as Catholics at least, we wait to see what the particular wording is of something, before we would say we're for or against that particular thing. And I think obviously human rights in general, we're very much, as Catholics, I think Christians, everybody is for human rights. I mean, I think in fact, we believe, I think most Catholics would say, Christians as well, non-Catholics would say that the concept of human rights itself comes out of our Judeo-Christian heritage. I mean, they're not talking about human rights in communist countries. They're not talking about human rights even in it came out of this historical context of Judeo-Christianity. Not to say that we understand, I think, as Catholics, the separation of church and state, in the United States. But I guess so. Human rights in general, obviously, we support very much. And with the particular human rights ordinance, how that would play out would depend on the actual wording. About same-sex marriage?
And gender identity, sexual orientation, and human rights.
Sure.
Overall acceptance.
Yeah. So for us, I mean, as Catholics, we, I think the concern with the topic in general is the difference between providing services for someone in general and then participating in something as a company or if that makes sense. So being compelled into the marketplace to have to participate in a service such as a same-sex wedding or something like that, the church is very much against that, against having anyone be forced into that situation. I think it's one of the things that came out, was the pizza place in Indiana that was going to use RFRA to not serve pizza to gay people or whatever it was. Comparing those two and making them equal to us is very disconcerting because we see them as very different. If somebody walks into your restaurant and wants pizza and you're like, does that place, are you gay? Is that a question that they ask? How do you, we don't ask people that come into our church, are you gay? Panera bread or something like that. Well, yeah, we'll give you a bagel if you're straight. How, it's almost like, I think, to me, as an observer, it's like we went out and we found someone who would go on the record and say something like, "We won't serve pizza to gay people." And then so it was held up as like, "Oh, see, RFRA, this is what's going to happen." The different, there's in our mind, in among the Catholic circles, there's a huge difference between that and saying, you know, you must participate in this same-sex marriage, which we find to be contrary to natural law, divine law, etc. And we would never participate in one of those. You know, we wouldn't. That's just part of who we are. We see a big difference in that, and so there's a concern, I guess, that that people think of those things as the same thing. That, well, we have to make sure that the pizza place serves gay people, and that everyone has to participate in same-sex marriages that wants to do that's asked to do that. I think it was the Oregon case or Colorado where the baker, you know, who served gay people. I hope that's not offensive. LGBT people for many years, but then was compelled to have to participate in something that she found objectionable, which is the same-sex marriage. That's the kind of thing that causes concern among Catholics. Appreciate your comment, and just the one quick thing that I would say, I think a larger discussion is happening about what marriage is, and I think even, just real quick, that even if same-sex marriage, wherever it's legalized and allowed to happen, there would still be people who aren't allowed to marry in the way that they would choose. And so we don't think of it as discrimination, but rather a conversation about what marriage is, and allowing same-sex marriage doesn't then suddenly say anyone can marry whoever they want. So that would.
I wasn't talking about marriage. I was talking about RFRA. I was talking about broader. Because I'm actually an anti-assimilationist. I'm like, I don't need your marriage.
Gotcha.
One or two more quick